So welcome, Arnold, with Canine Basics. We are talking about how diet affects dog behavior. Why don't we start with you introducing yourself and telling us your background and how you got started at Canine Basics?
Okay, so I started with Canine Basics in 2016. After I separated from the military, I was a military working dog trainer. Um, and I never thought I'd find my way back in New Jersey. And yet, here I am back in New Jersey. I am now the training director for Canine Basics. I have mentored under Brian and learned a ton in the way of um, behavioral modification, nutrition, and being able to evaluate the dogs and look at the total package and assess what's going on and figure out why it's happening and how to fix it.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Where were you before New Jersey? You said
San
you're back.
Diego.
Oh, okay. But you're originally from New Jersey.
Yes, yeah, that was just San Diego. Was my wife and I were both active duty. That was our last duty station. We separated from the Marine Corps and went to school out there, and enjoyed California for a little bit.
Yeah, I'm a Santa Barbara girl, so
Okay.
that's why I asked. Very cool. So we were speaking earlier about the gut-brain connection and how about 70 to 80% of the immune system and a large portion of the neurotransmitter production, like serotonin, occur in the gut. And a disrupted gut means inflammation and nervous system imbalance. And then a healthier gut, we would assume, would mean, calmer behavior, better focus, and emotional stability. Do you have any examples for us on training dogs that come in that kind of give you a bit of a red flag showing that they may have a nutrition imbalance?
Yeah, absolutely. The majority of the times, it's going to be either the dog's underweight, overweight. Those are going to be some of the first visual things. But as we sit down, we offer free demo evaluations where we're able to collect some information, share some of our philosophies, give them some information. The biggest thing is getting these clients informed so that they can make an informed decision. But definitely being able to have conversation with them and see the dog in person and see what's going on and talk about what's going on. Some of the little red flags that pop up that I see often are, dogs that are chewing everything, ingesting things. We've got a dog in currently that was eating mulch, dirt, leaves, sticks, pine cones, you name it. If it was on the ground, he's ingesting it. He's a little Frenchy, so for him to be, putting things into his belly and having it pass out the other end, I told them, this is something you've got to get ahead of. This could be, this could land you in the vet hospital. This could end up being life-threatening to him. The week prior to coming in, he ate a poop bag, an empty poop bag, but it was able to pass through the system. They had to monitor him. It was able to pass through the system. So when I started saying some of these things to mom, she was like, yeah, okay, I'm on board. You got to make some changes because dogs will scavenge from their environment. He's picking up everything off the ground. He can't get his nose up off the ground because he's trying to source from his environment what's missing in his diet. Those are some like easy red flags for us to see right away. There's other things as well, but that's just what comes to the top of my mind right now.
Yeah. And how do you differentiate if it's boredom or if he is truly, lacking something in his
Sure,
diet?
sure. Part of that goes, into conversation. We'll talk about, what's the dog eating? What's the dog's daily life look like? With him, they were like, oh, we can't wait to get him into training because, he's just a menace throughout the day. We're trying to work and he's getting into everything. They were like, he's great first thing in the morning and at night, but they were like, throughout the day, he's just terrible. Lack of activity, stuff like that is going to be an indicator. For him, it's not just like he's chewing on items, he's ingesting items.
Yeah.
And that's a totally different thing. When she started listing off, it's
Mhm.
pretty much everything, definitely trying to source from his environment.
Yeah. We call that garbage gut.
Yeah, yeah.
We see that a lot with clients that'll come onto our live chat and they'll say, oh my gosh, my dog just won't stop ripping open the garbage, or they're taking things off of the counter. And I actually had experience with that. I adopted a Weim, and don't judge me. No offense to people that love Weims. It's definitely been a breed where it's been a big learning curve for me. But when I originally met the parents of the pet parent of the Weim, they had reached out to me and they said, we think this puppy has cancer. We don't know what to do. She was 6 months old. She was emaciated, but she had garbage gut. She was eating everything, absolutely everything, trash. She was taking food off the children's plate. And they were feeding her a, you know, semi popular, lower quality kibble brand.
Okay.
I explained to them, I said, I'll work with you. I'll work with you on the side on my off time and just like try to educate you. And I worked with them for about 1 hour and they were like, can you just take her? We just don't want
Mm.
to deal with this. So I did. I adopted her and I got her home. And my goodness, was it a challenge getting her gut stabilized. So they were feeding her chicken and rice. Um, but instead of just feeding it for a series of a few days or a week, they fed it to her for months.
Wow.
Months. So yeah, she was a mess and it took a really
It's a
long
big
time.
nutritional imbalance right there.
Huge. And for a growing puppy as well,
Absolutely.
and pretty high drive. She goes hunting with my husband and she's a pretty high drive girl. But when I changed her diet, it actually took, healing takes time. It took a very long time
Yeah.
for her to stabilize. And then after she stabilized, I realized that she had that behavior of, the lacking. It now turned into a learned behavior. So I can see when she gets bored, she'll like walk through the kitchen and she'll like take her nose and she'll skim the counter. And I finally got her to stop taking things off the counter. But it's something I'm always having to keep an eye on
Yeah,
with her.
yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. There's a lot of things that affect behavior,
Hmm.
and nutrition being one of them. But dogs can, become patterned in doing this is what I've always done, so that's what I'm going to do moving forward. So when you have that long pattern of, I'm able to just take food, we always say dogs do things for one of two reasons. They either think they can or they think they have to. You've got like a combination of those going on where she's like, I have to source from my environment, but also like I can get away with doing this.
Yeah, yeah, she's a very interesting girl. So another thing that comes to mind is blood sugar stability and emotional stability. So we
Yeah.
do have a lot of people that have reached out to me and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, my dog has the zoomies constantly," and then they get irritable and then almost like an ADHD behavior and they won't settle at night. They're just very restless. Um, and then I ask, what is the dog eating? And then I'll find out that they're on a very like highly processed carb heavy diet. And so we're seeing, blood sugar spikes and then blood sugar crashes. How would you go about explaining that to a client if they're very new to, a different type of feeding journey, so
Yeah.
to
So, I don't, a lot of times I won't go into great detail.
speak?
Sometimes it can just become overwhelming. So I try and simplify it as much as possible. There's a
Hmm.
definite, mind and body connection, and what's going on in the gut has a correlation with what's going on with them mentally. So when we come across cases where there's, some severe agitation, the dog's either being aggressive,
Hmm.
resource guarding, and keep in mind some of these things, genetics plays a role into behavior, but just as much as learned behavior, patterns of behavior, their environment, and food. All of those things are going to play a role into there. So when it comes down to genetics, you're fighting against genetics. There's only so much you're going to be able to do there. But when we come across cases like that where we're going, all right, these things are going on, we know that we can fix a lot if we address the whole dog.
Hmm.
So, behaviorally, we're going to have to do some things, recreating some associations, reassociating things, desensitizing the dog, socializing the dog. But diet plays a big part of there, and it's one of the things with our training programs. It's part of why we want to get a look at the dog prior to them coming in, but also we want them to understand, some knowledge, give them some background. But
Mhm.
with some of these dogs, where we definitely see like there's things that could be related to food. One of the first things I do is refer them out. Now, my go-to is the Natural Diet Foundation. Wendy
Mhm.
Volhard's NDF2. That's my go-to because it's simple for a lot of folks. It's I'm putting one scoop of the NDF2 into there, and then I've got my one scoop, or however much you're putting into there. But your one scoop of protein, add some water, reconstitute, you're good to go. And that's getting them on the right track in a lot of ways. There's a lot more for some dogs that we're going, okay, we've got to address a lot more. There's a lot more going down that. And that's where I'll refer them out to you guys. I want you to jump into the live chat. And we've done that with several folks where we've referred them over to you guys to deal with, more severe, uh, whether it's allergic responses or anything like that. But all of those things play a factor into how the dog's feeling. If a dog is irritable, he's constantly scratching, his ears are bothering him. Yeah, he's going to have issues with the vet touching around his head or somebody going to go put a collar on him. He's had constant ear infections, or they're having issues with, anal glands. Anytime a dog approaches them, you watch two dogs interact. What's the first thing they do? It's like the canine greeting is to go
Their little
right up to each
handshake.
other's.
Yeah.
They're doing circles around each other,
Yep.
sniffing each other's rear ends. So I've
Yeah.
seen dogs that become so guarded of their back end. It could be an injury.
Hmm.
It could be like I mentioned earlier. One of our trainers, her dog experienced some of this where he had an impacted anal gland. Um, and he was having some ongoing issues with that where the vet was going, hey, you're going to have to come in and we're going to have to deal with this, and I want you to schedule every 6 weeks. He's part of the food trial, but
Okay.
he's now on a natural diet and he doesn't have any of those issues anymore.
Right. Right.
So diet can help solve a lot of issues, and you see the reactivity goes away.
Hmm. Yeah, and that brings me back to, you made a comment about allergies and whatnot, and excuse me, and behavior. So a lot of times food sensitivity can actually look like behavior problems, right?
Yep,
So we'll have,
100%.
yeah, when an ingredient reacts poorly, or excuse me, when the body reacts poorly to an ingredient, the stress doesn't just stay in the gut, right? You mentioned irritability, you mentioned reactivity, difficulty calming down or itching. And a lot of times I'll have to explain to clients that this may not be a true allergy, right? Like anaphylactic shock. Um, it may be an intolerance. And the good news
Sure.
is, intolerances can be healed. And then once you're on that healing path, like you said, you start to see these, behavior changes. And then that also brings us into the additives and the artificial ingredients that are being pumped into all of this different dog food. And all of those ingredients, they can absolutely overstimulate a system. It's just like what humans are dealing with right now when you have a kid that's pretty hyperactive. So I think the big picture we're sort of touching on is we're not necessarily telling a pet parent, you have to feed this diet. We're just trying to educate them and meet them where they're at
Yep,
and give them that power of education to make an informed decision, moving forward
absolutely.
with their dogs. I've had to really play around with diet with, I had told you before, I have a little Brittany Spaniel mix, and she is definitely the most sensitive dog I've ever had. But I did notice through the feeding trials that we're doing that, some of the ingredients aren't sitting well with her, whereas my other dogs are completely fine, but her behavior has drastically changed. She's has anxiety. She, very, very anxious. She's chewing and it's just not sitting well with her. So I've been having to just kind of shuffle ingredients around and put her on a different diet to see what is going to work for her. And hopefully she'll stop waking me up at 5 in the morning, jumping on my face. But that's to be to be continued.
I hear a lot of times, I don't know why he's doing this. I don't know why she's doing this. And you got to play detective a little bit.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
sometimes it's your dog, you're used to watching all of those things and you're going, okay, we know there's been no other changes in the environment. There's been no stimulus changes other than, what she's eating.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, you are what you eat, right?
Hmm.
Um, so are there any examples, any success stories where you've had somebody come in and they were, a little set in their ways, but you offered up education and then perhaps you saw a change in the dog behavior?
Sure. Yeah, time and time again. I can't tell you how many young dogs we've had come in where they're doing the same exact thing I described earlier, um, where they're either they look underfed and we're feeding them, 4 times a day, and they're getting, enough food for to sustain, a 100-pound dog,
Mhm.
and for whatever reason, this 50-pound puppy still can't put on weight. And being able to change, what they're eating and being able to refer them out to you guys and, get them on a couple supplements and get them moving in the right direction. Uh, Again, it doesn't just solve what's going on with, visually the dog's weight increased, he looks healthier, the coat looks better, no more ear infections going on, but behaviorally they report back changes to us.
That's-
So I see clients all the time that where they came in for an evaluation and they went through with training and we made some recommendations. I see them all the time now stopping out here and they're buying food and they're going, we
Yeah.
just had one today, actually. She was just out there about 30 minutes ago and she was getting a ton of meat. She was getting a ton of protein and stuff. And one of our office staff from the back was carrying out loads of bags. She's got a bunch of shopping bags coming out the front door. And I helped her carry them over to the car. And I said, how long is this going to hold you over for? And she was like, oh, this gets me like about 5 weeks.
Oh
And
my
she was like,
goodness.
oh, we can't be without it. He licks the bowl clean. He loves it. He's no longer stealing stuff off my counters. He wants his food. And I was like, yeah, it makes a big difference when you're giving them adequate nutrition.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's even, even adding in fresh food to a bowl. If a client can only feed a certain kibble brand, that's fine. But even incorporating some fresh food into that bowl will absolutely make a difference.
Oh, yeah.
Farm fresh egg or some veggies, some pureed veggies. I always try to make those suggestions readily available because we have so many people that reach out to us. We're like, we want to feed Volhard so bad, but at this moment, it's just not right for us because we're going to be traveling, for a month or something like that. And we just don't
Right.
have room in our RV fridge and blah, blah, blah. And so, being able to offer those alternatives, right, I think is pretty empowering as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely.
Well, awesome. Do you have anything you would say to a new pet parent that is like just coming in for training and they're saying, "Okay, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm getting a puppy in 3 weeks. I need it trained. I need food recommendations. What do I do? Where do I go?"
Well, they're on the right start. I always try and preach education to everybody,
Hmm.
and reaching out to, a trainer is fantastic. You're getting a young dog, especially for first time dog owners. Unfortunately, we see a lot of people that are reactive to a situation rather than proactive. If you can take the proactive approach and do a little bit of research, do a little bit of forethinking, what do I want to do with this dog? What are my plans? Unfortunately, a lot of folks that come through the door, they're like, I thought this is what was going to happen. I was going to get this dog, and this is what's actually happening. I'm going, well, you did get a Belgian Malinois. And one of the first things I'll ask some of those folks that come in with like, working dogs, I'm going, is this breed new to you? How much do you know about them? And they're like, oh, one of my neighbors had one, and he was walking down
Yeah.
the street. He's so beautiful, and he's so well behaved. And they're like, mine is tearing up the house. He chewed a hole through the drywall. And I'm going, okay, now we've got to just start, dumping loads of education towards them. So that's one of the biggest things is, you know, it's up to us as dog owners to lead and guide them to be successful. We got to advocate for our dogs. So get yourself informed.
Yeah, and small achievable goals, right?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Setting small achievable goals, I think, is also pretty important and empowering. I know with me, I have 6 dogs now. I inherited 2 dogs when
You're
a
a little
family.
outnumbered.
Oh my goodness, yeah, my husband's grandfather passed away, and we inherited his two dogs, and it has been a journey because he only fed them hot dogs and hamburgers. I'm not even making this up. So when the one is she's older, she's about 11 years old, she's a beagle mix, and she came in and I thought, oh my gosh, this dog isn't going to last like the year because she had a cough and she had very cloudy eyes, and like typically when I hear that hack I think of, oh no, she might be in, congestive heart failure. But I got her on a really good diet, and she like runs around like a puppy. Like she chases the chickens, she's living her best life. The Jack Russell's a little more challenging. You've met the wonderful
Yeah,
Penny.
yeah.
She is yeah, she's food aggressive. She gets very excited if when I'm letting the dogs out of the crate, she's like, "Oh yes, now is my time to attack them." So I'm not sure what's going on. Before we got her, I know that a family member was feeding her like a very highly processed carby diet. And I think just kind of tapering her off of those carbohydrates, she's like starting to mellow out a bit, but she's also still a challenge. I might send her to you
Yeah,
guys.
yeah. It's that you definitely have to combine all the pieces. I use the analogy of the puzzle all the time.
Yeah.
Putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. If you're missing pieces, you're not going to see the whole picture. The whole
Yeah.
picture is a healthy, well-balanced dog that you can enjoy, that you have full control over. I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it is to be able to just let your dog run free and go, come, and they turn around and they come. You don't have to yell. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to
Yeah.
repeat yourself. You're not going cookies.
Yeah, you're
Out
not,
there trying to bribe them.
yeah,
So
driving
putting
them
the
with,
whole thing together, you're doing the nutritional side of things, but developing that pack structure. And when you've got multiple dogs, it becomes that much more important because they feed off of each other's energy then.
yeah, and they're all intact females.
Oh
It's
boy.
it's awful. It is absolutely awful. I was like, what was I thinking? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
this is a terrible decision. But there's actually a gentleman down that lives down the road from us. I say he's my neighbor, but I live in the country, so he's like a neighbor that lives half a mile down the road. But we got a call the other day, and he has 13 Great Pyrenees that he
Oh
needs to
wow.
rehome. I guess they were accidental puppies during COVID, and then he had multiple heart attacks and he can barely walk. And so I said, I'll go out and I'll try to take photos of them. These things were feral. They were all in different, enclosures outside. And I said, wow, that dog, that's probably the biggest dog I've ever seen. So his one dog came out, he was very friendly. This dog had to be like, it looked like a hippo. I've never seen a dog so big. And I said, "Oh my goodness, what are you feeding this dog? He's so big." He said, "Oh, do you have any remedies for a cough? He's got a cough." And I said, "Okay, like what are you feeding him?" And he's like, "Oh, whatever kibble's on sale at the grocery outlet." And he's like, "And then whatever we have left over and some bacon grease." And I was like, "Ah, oh my goodness." But
You don't know what you don't know though.
yeah, but anyway, he was a very nice gentleman, but I have to say, he sat and listened to me for about 15 minutes, and I just gave him some very free, easy, simple
Yeah.
education. I said, "Hey, you raise chickens and ducks, like you can absolutely use those farm fresh eggs." I said, "You like to give them scraps from the table. Instead, why don't you try giving him some veggies?" And he was like, "Oh, they can eat veggies?" And I said, "Yeah, only, and I told him which ones were appropriate. And it was yeah, it was a very enlightening conversation for him. Luckily, a rescue stepped in and they helped him out. But I went into the conversation thinking, there is no way that this old man is going to listen to a word I say. Should I even waste my time? But I just, I was as kind as could be, and I wasn't trying to say what you're doing is wrong, right?
Sure.
I was just
Sure.
like, hey, if you want some information, I'm happy to help you. So it was a very interesting experience.
I have similar interactions like that. It's easy for me to forget, there was a time where I didn't know. I looked at strictly, my background being a military working dog trainer. I
Hmm.
thought, the kibble that the military had contracted with had to be good stuff because those guys live a very regimented lifestyle. Everything is, time, date, and stamp for every interaction that those dogs do. Every time they have a bowel movement, it's listed, So there was a time where I was ignorant to a lot of that. And so when I have an interaction with somebody and go, why don't you try doing some of this? And they go like, oh, I didn't know dogs could have that. I'm
I
going,
know.
yep,
I love seeing that aha moment because I
yeah,
was I was ignorant as well. I came from the equine nutrition and human nutrition background, and when I found Brian and Lisa, they were like, "Oh, what do you know about, dog nutrition?" I said, "Oh, I know a little bit here and there. I'm familiar with raw feeding, but luckily I already had the foundation and schooling of the other backgrounds." And I thought, gosh, I would say like at least 15 years ago, I was absolutely ignorant to what my dogs were eating. I thought I was buying them the best kibble possible.
yep,
And then when I finally realized how to read labels, I was like, oh boy.
eye opening.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yes, yes, it
And
is.
pick your poison. But yeah, it's been a very wonderful journey, and I do love when people have those aha moments and feel that empowerment of, wow, I can make an informed decision on whatever goes into my pet's bowl and know where the resources are coming from, etc.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. I had that aha moment at Wendy Volhard's Healthy Dog Conference,
mhm.
and then I just sheer guilt.
Yeah,
I'm
I
going
know.
like, boy,
Yep.
I've been doing this really wrong.
Feeding guilt. I think we've all been there. I've definitely gone through some feeding guilt where I've been like,
Yeah.
ooh, I made better
So
decisions.
now I've just kind of made that my mission to share that. That's part of those
Yeah.
demo evals now. It's not just about what's going on with the dog's behavior, but like the total package. Let's look at everything. And, I want my dogs to be able to stick around with me as long as possible. And I know these folks that are coming in through our doors feel the same way. So it's just
Yeah.
sharing that information with them so that their dog can be as healthy as possible for as long as possible.